The showdown between religious freedom and LGBT rights is underway at the State House. Both Republicans and Democrats agree lawmakers need to pass something comprehensive that tackles the balance between anti-discrimination protection and religious liberty. A so-called fix that would let the state move on from the RFRA controversy. Lawmakers released their proposed legislation this week. Our State House reporter Brandon Smith reports.
The scene this week at the State House looked familiar.
To begin this prayer, would you pray aloud with me?
Religious groups on one side praying for lawmakers to, in their words, do what's right.
We see a real conflict between the First Amendment and the 14th Amendment, and we think it's time that Christians came out of the closet, quit hiding so much, and engage in a battle.
On the other side, dozens rallying for the state to update its civil rights law.
Today is the beginning of a tough battle, and this will be our toughest test yet. But we know you're up for it, and so are we.
This marks the third straight legislative session dogged by issues surrounding gay rights. In 2014, it was a fight over a constitutional amendment banning same-sex marriage. Earlier this year, the controversy surrounded a religious freedom bill known as RFRA, perceived by some as a license to discriminate against the LGBT community. Lawmakers started work this summer on a piece of legislation aimed at finally putting the issue to bed. At Org Day this week, Senate Republicans released their first draft as a loud crowd outside continued to rally.
If they're for religious liberty, we've got a great carve-out for religious liberty. If it's for extending rights to the LGBT community, they have reached that goal as well. So I think there's reason for celebration on both sides, although I doubt that we're going to see that coming right out of the chute here, you know.
The Senate GOP bill includes protection from discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. It does so while exempting religious institutions, including churches, religious schools, and religious nonprofits. The measure also, for the first time in state law, defines sexual orientation and gender identity. Specifically, it says for a person to claim gender identity discrimination, they must prove their gender, either through medical records or by showing they've lived as the gender they say they are for at least 1 year. Senate Republican leader David Long says that requirement is intended to provide consistency when enforcing the law.
If you look around the country, it's a very difficult and varied definition that we look at. And Senator Holman has done his best to come up with one that makes sense and common sense so that we are sensitive to the fact that someone may be going through that process, but also sensitive to the fact that it doesn't make sense for someone to say, I woke up today and I'm a different gender. You have to deal with that.
Democratic leaders were quick to respond, expressing concern that the bill's definition of gender identity creates a gap that could leave transgender people open to discrimination. Minority Leader Tim Lannon, who authored the Democrats' version of the bill, says lawmakers need to show the world that discrimination as a matter of policy is not allowed in the state of Indiana.
And I think we should make no mistake that the citizens of this state and other states and businesses inside and outside of Indiana are watching to see what we do. And they want to know, will there be across-the-board protection and no license to discriminate?
The Senate GOP bill provides exemptions when it comes to the business of marriage. Those with 3 or fewer full-time employees do not have to provide services or participate in any same-sex marriage-related activities, including ceremonies or receptions.
Religious liberty is secondary, it seems at times, in the eyes of the court in trying to deal with this civil rights issue. And we want to make sure that both of them are addressed. So we've beefed up the rights and clarified the rights of our organizations, of our pastors, of their affiliated groups, of our institutions of higher education as well as K through 12 schools that's affiliated with churches, to make sure that there's no question who is protected and exempted.
Freedom Indiana, the coalition that rallied against Indiana's ban against same-sex marriage and the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, is spearheading the drive for a civil rights law. In a statement, the group wrote, it's encouraged the Senate is making civil rights a priority and will work with both chambers on a final version. But the national LGBT legal organization Lambda Legal quickly blasted the GOP's draft as a wolf in sheep's clothing, criticizing its emphasis on religious exemptions and noting it would supersede local human rights ordinances. This year, we've seen 17 municipal governments pass ordinances dealing with civil rights, particularly in the area of sexual discrimination. The GOP's proposal prohibits local governments from adopting ordinances that go beyond state law.
So the state is basically taking charge of this issue, and this will be the law of the land in the state of Indiana.
Governor Pence says he's still weighing the issue, and Republican lawmakers say they can't speak on his behalf. But Christina Inskeep, who's advocating on behalf of her son, who is transgendered, says she'd love the opportunity to sit down with Pence and let him know gay people, transgendered people are just regular people who want to live like any other Hoosier.
You know, we're living and working in this state. We are paying taxes, we volunteer, we go to church, we help out our neighbor, we go home and go to bed and feed the dog and all that stuff that everybody does.